Wind came off the ridge in one long push, and Marin Cole did not blink. She sat on an ammo crate outside the operations tent at Firebase Wallace, high in the winter mountains where the snow never fully melted off the north faces, and she watched the valley the way other people watch a fire. Below her, the whole task force was moving. Rangers loading trucks, air crews turning rotors, a colonel's voice cracking across the yard about a timeline that had already slipped twice. Nobody looked at her. That was normal. She was 5'2" in her boots, and the pack beside her came up past her hip, and when the new lieutenant had walked her in that morning, he had told the sergeant she was the augment from the precision cell, the way you'd describe a folding chair. Marin didn't correct him. She was checking the dope card clipped to her forearm, reading numbers off it the way you'd read a grocery list, and she was thinking about the wind, not the wind in the yard. The wind 800 meters out and 400 feet down, where the valley pinched and the air had to squeeze through a gap between two rock shoulders. She had been on this fire base for 6 days, and she had spent 5 of them on the North Berm with a wind meter and a notebook, and she knew something about that gap that nobody who'd flown in yesterday could know. She knew it lied. Cole, a big man, crossed the yard toward her, dark beard, master sergeant's rank, a voice built to carry over engines. Wade Bruner. He ran the Ranger Element's direct action piece, and he'd made his opinion of her plain in the first hour. "You're the shooter they sent." "That's me." He looked at the rifle case leaning on the crate, then at her, and did the arithmetic everyone did. The case was nearly as tall as she was. "How much you weigh soaking wet?" "110. On a heavy day. This is real country up here." He wasn't smiling. "When it goes loud, you stay out of the doorway. You let the men who train for it do the work. You understand me?" Marin looked up at him, and there was nothing in her face he could use. "I understand you fine, Sergeant." He held her eyes a second longer, waiting for the flinch, and didn't get it, and walked off unsettled without knowing why. Behind him, leaning in the tent flap with a clipboard he'd forgotten he was holding, a young comms specialist named Toby Reyes watched the whole thing and felt, without being able to say it, that the big sergeant had just lost an argument nobody had actually had. Before this is over, Wade Bruner is going to say her name into a radio, like it's the only word he has left. If you like stories about the people everybody underestimates, right up until the moment they can't, subscribe and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I read them. Somewhere, later tonight, a man is going to be carried out of a burning building by a woman half his size, and you are going to want to see his face when he realizes who has him. Stay to the end for that. It's the part I can't stop thinking about. The reason Marin Cole knew that Valley lied had a name, and the name was Del Hargrove. 15 years back, she'd been a rangy kid on a hard-scrabble sheep place in the high country, the kind of ground where the wind was a permanent tenant, and you planned your day around it. Del was the neighbor, 60 then, a retired long lines electrician who'd hunted the same drainages for 40 years and could tell you what a crosswind was doing at 900 yards by watching a single dry stalk of cheatgrass. He'd found her one winter afternoon lying prone in the frozen stubble behind her father's barn, plinking at a coffee can. She'd sat on a fence post 400 yards off, missing, adjusting, missing. He hadn't offered to help. He'd just laid down in the snow beside her, an old man folding himself down joint by joint, and watched her shoot for an hour without saying a word. Then, when she finally rang the can, he'd said the only thing he ever taught her that mattered. "The wind you feel on your face is a liar, girl. It's telling you about right here. It don't know a thing about out there. You want the truth? You read what the country does to it between you and the can, the grass, the dust, the way the snow comes off a lip. The country can't lie. Only the air on your cheek does that. He'd said it maybe 100 times over the years, in 100 different ways, always ending the same. The country can't lie. She had buried him 4 years ago on a day so cold the backhoe struggled, and she had never once stood behind a rifle since without hearing him. She'd carried that into the Army, and the Army, for once, had noticed. She'd outshot instructors who outranked her. She'd been quietly folded into a precision cell that did work nobody wrote home about, attached out to task forces who needed a particular problem solved and were always, without fail, surprised when the solution turned out to be a small woman who barely came up to their shoulders. She let them be surprised. Dell had taught her that too, without meaning to. Let them look at the outside. The outside was never the part that shot. There was one thing the Army hadn't fixed, and it sat under everything else like a stone in a boot. Her sister. 9 years since she'd spoken to Rennie. A stupid fight at their mother's funeral that had calcified into silence, then into a kind of permanent weather between them, then into the simple fact that Marin did not know her own sister's phone number anymore, and was too proud to ask their aunt for it. Rennie had a daughter now. Marin knew that much, secondhand. A niece she'd never met. A little girl who was safe and far away in a town Marin couldn't have found on a map. Every deployment, Marin wrote a letter she never sent. She had one in her breast pocket right now, folded into a hard square, soft at the creases from being carried. She told herself she'd mail it when she got back. She'd told herself that 11 times. The setup for the operation was 3 days of the task force learning, one small humiliation at a time, that they'd misjudged her, though most of them wouldn't admit it until it was almost too late. The first came on the range they'd scraped into the hillside. Brunner had set up a demonstration for the young rangers, steel targets at distances that got respectful nods, and he'd shot well, because he was genuinely good. That was the thing people missed about Wade Brunner. He was loud, but he was not a fraud. He rang steel at 600 to a small round of appreciation, and then, half as a joke and half as a lesson he wanted to teach in public, he'd waved Marin up to the line in front of 40 men. "Show us how the precision cell does it, Cole. There's a plate out at 9. Been out there all week. Nobody's touched it." It was a setup, and everyone knew it. The 900 plate sat right in the mouth of the gap, in that squirrely cross-valley wind, and it had humbled 2 of his best all week. Marin lay down in the dirt. She didn't hurry. She spent a long time just watching a thread of snow feathering off a rock lip halfway to the target, watching the way the dry grass at the 400 mark leaned different from the grass at 7. She dialed something nobody saw, settled, breathed out, and broke the shot. The clang came back across the valley a full second and a half later, clear as a struck bell. She got up, dusted her front, and handed Brunner back his spotting scope. "Wind's switching about 2/3 of the way out," she said, not unkindly. "The gap does it. You're reading the flags here, and they're telling you about here." She nodded at the valley. "That plate lives out there." Brunner didn't say anything. That was the second scene, though it happened the same afternoon. The moment he was quietly proven wrong and kept his mouth shut, chewing on it, because a man like that doesn't rebuild his whole picture of a person in 1 second. But something had gone behind his eyes. The third thing had nothing to do with shooting. That evening, jammed into the mess tent with sleet ticking on the canvas, a young ranger named Pruitt was losing badly at cards and taking it hard, and Marin, who nobody had figured for a talker, quietly took the kid apart at his own game, and then, instead of collecting, taught him the tell he'd been broadcasting all night. She did it funny. She did an impression of his own face every time he drew a good card that had the whole table roaring. Pruitt, loudest of all. For 10 minutes the tent forgot the mountains, and the timeline, and the war. And a couple of the men who'd watched her ring that plate looked at her differently now. Not as the strange small shooter, but as someone they'd want around when things got long and cold. Toby Reyes, the comms kid, watched her deal a hand and thought, she does everything like she already knows how it ends. He couldn't have told you why that stuck with him. It just did. The crisis came at 0400 on the 4th day, and it did not knock. A recon team, 4 men from a reconnaissance element working a village 6 kilometers up the valley, had gone into a walled compound to grab a target, and the whole thing had come apart. The intel was wrong. The compound wasn't a farmhouse with 2 guards. It was a hardened position with better than a dozen fighters and heavy weapons. 2 of the 4 recon men were down and pinned inside the compound walls. The other 2 were holed up in an outbuilding, bleeding, running low, and the enemy had a machine gun up in the compound stone tower that owned the only approach, a long open snowfield that any relief force would have to cross in the open, in the dark, uphill. The colonel had a name, Ambrose Vane, and Colonel Ambrose Vane stood in the operations tent, looking at a map that offered him no good answers, and he did the math no commander wants to do. A ground assault across that snowfield against that tower gun would cost him more men than it saved. Aircraft couldn't get eyes or fires on the tower's firing position through the terrain and the weather without coming into the teeth of the heavy weapons. And the 2 men pinned in the compound had, by the medic's flat estimate on the radio, maybe 90 minutes before their wounds, and the cold finished what the fight had started. 4 men out there. 90 minutes. That was the number. And Vane said it out loud to the tent because saying it made it real. 4 of ours. 90 minutes. Somebody give me something. It was Brunner who said it. He didn't want to. You could see it cost him. The tower gun's the whole problem, sir. Take the tower gun off the board, and I can get a team across that field. He paused. His jaw worked. You need somebody who can reach into that gap and hit a firing port at 900 meters in the dark, in this wind. Another pause, longer. There's one person on this firebase who can make that shot, and I stood in the yard 3 days ago and told her to stay out of the doorway. Vane looked at him. Cole? Cole, Brunner said, like the word had a weight. They pulled her out of a dead sleep, and she was dressed before the runner finished talking. Vane met her at the map. He was a proud man, and what he had to say didn't come easy, and to his credit, he didn't dress it up. Sergeant Cole, 3 days ago, I read a personnel note that called you an augment, and I let that word do my thinking for me. I was wrong to. I'm telling you that now because I'm about to ask you to do something I have no right to expect anyone to pull off, and you deserve to hear me admit I doubted it before you go do it. He put his finger on the map, on a knife edge of rock above the snowfield. Can you get up here and take that tower gun off my people? Marin looked at the map for 3 seconds. Yes, sir. She keyed her radio one time as she walked out to the truck, and the men in the tent heard the voice that was going to run the next 90 minutes. Not the folding chair, not the augment, not the Buck 10 kid who should stay out of the doorway. Flat, level, unhurried. All stations, this is Overwatch. Moving to position now. Nobody crosses that field until I say the tower's cold. Confirm. The climb to the shooting position took the better part of 40 minutes, and every one of them tried to kill her. The knife edge Vane had pointed to was real, but the map hadn't shown the ice. The whole north face of the spur was glazed under 2 inches of fresh powder, and Marin went up it on her hands as much as her feet, the rifle case dragging at her back like an anchor, her breath tearing in the thin, cold air. Toby Reyes had insisted on coming as her spotter and radio relay. A comms kid with no business on a mountain, who'd simply picked up a pack and fallen in behind her when nobody stopped him. And twice she heard him go down hard behind her and had to wait, flat against the ice, while he found his feet again. "Talk to me, Reyes." "Still here." His voice shook. "Still here, Overwatch." The wind up on the exposed edge was a living thing, shoving at them in gusts that could put a person off a 200-foot drop. And the cold got into the works of everything. Her fingers went stupid inside her gloves. The bolt of her rifle stiffened. The batteries in Toby's radio started dying, and he had to keep it inside his jacket against his own body heat to keep it alive. That was the first complication, and it stacked on the next. When they finally crested onto the shooting shelf, and she got prone and got glass on the compound, she saw the geometry was worse than the map had promised. The tower's firing port faced half away from her. She could see the muzzle of the machine gun licking fire every time it hammered another burst down the snowfield, but she could not see the gunner behind it. The stone lip of the port shielded him. She had a clear shot at a machine gun and no clear shot at the man running it. "Overwatch base." Vane's voice tight. "Talk to me. My men are getting colder out there. What's your holdup?" "I don't have the gunner," Marin said. "Port's angled off me. I've got his gun, and not him. Stand by." She lay in the snow, and she made herself slow down. Somewhere far to her left, down in the compound, one of the pinned recon men fired 3 rounds and went quiet again, and she did not let herself think about what the quiet meant. She counted her own breath. Then the personal part of it arrived, the way it always did at the worst possible moment. Movement, close. Below and to her right, maybe 200 meters down the spur, a fighter with a rifle was climbing toward their position. The enemy had put a man on the high ground to watch their own flank, and he was going to walk right up onto Marin and Toby in the dark. Toby saw him the same second she did, and made a small sound in his throat. "Overwatch, there's—" "I see him." 200 meters moving, in the dark, with the main problem still unsolved in her scope. She had a choice that was not a shooting choice. Fire on the climbing man, and give away the position she needed to solve the tower, and lose the angle, and lose the 4 men below. Or don't fire, and let him come, and gamble that she could finish the tower before he closed the distance and killed them both. She keyed the radio, low. "Reyes, listen to me. There's a man coming up the spur on your side. I can't take him without blowing this whole thing. I need you to hold him off me while I work. Can you do that?" A long silence. Toby Reyes was a comms specialist. He had a rifle he'd qualified with a year ago, and had barely touched since. His hands were shaking from cold and fear both. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I got him. Do your thing, Overwatch." And that was the act of courage that made everything else possible. A terrified kid with a rifle he didn't trust, crawling 10 meters to a rock and putting himself between the enemy and the one person who could save those men, so that she could keep her eye in the glass. She could not have done it, and solved the tower both. He did the thing she couldn't. She got back on the gun, and she stared at the problem that had no answer, and she called the empty channel while she did it. "Saber 1-4, Overwatch." The pinned recon team's call sign. She wanted to tell them help was 30 seconds out, wanted one of them to answer, so she'd know how many were still breathing. Saber 1-4. Overwatch. Come in. Static. Saber 1-4. Overwatch. Nothing. Just the hiss, and under it the wind, and somewhere below the flat hammering of that tower gun chewing up the dark. 3 seconds of a silence that had a bottom to it, and Maren Cole felt something cold that had nothing to do with the mountain, and she made herself put it away, because the way to fill that channel was not to keep calling into it. The way to fill it was to kill the gun. Behind her, off to the right, Toby's rifle cracked, once, then twice, and a fighter's return fire snapped overhead, and the private war for the flank was on, and she trusted the kid, and did not look. Now she solved it. Here is the thing about that valley, and about that night, and about Del Hargrove lying in the frozen stubble 15 years ago. Maren could not see the gunner, but she had spent 5 days on the North Berm, learning what the country did to the wind in that gap. And she had spent 15 years learning to shoot the thing she could not touch by reading the thing she could. And lying on that shelf, she saw what the night was handing her. Every time the tower gun fired a long burst, the muzzle threw a bloom of hot gas and disturbed snow off the stone lip of the firing port. And in the bitter cold, that hot gas hit the frozen air and hung for a second as a little cloud of condensation and ice crystals, lit faintly from below by the muzzle flash. She keyed the radio and talked it through slow, because Toby needed to hear it steady, and because saying it made her hands believe it. Reyes, hold your man and listen. I only say this once. I can't see the gunner, but I can see where his gun's gas hangs in the cold. That little puff off the port, every long burst. The port faces off me, but the gas drifts back on the wind. This wind, my wind. The one coming off my left shoulder right now. That puff is the gunner's own breath showing me where his head has to be. He's got to be tucked in behind and below where that cloud starts, 1 forearm's length back off the muzzle, because that's how a man holds that gun. I don't shoot the cloud. I read the cloud, walk it back the length of a man's reach, and down the height of his brow. And I put the round through the stone lip, where the round'll skip off the angle and find the space behind it. The country can't lie. The gas tells me the truth the port's trying to hide. How do you know the wind won't move the puff before you shoot? Because I'm not reading where it drifts to. I'm reading where it starts, right at the muzzle, before the wind's had it. The drift just tells me which way's downwind. So I know which side he's tucked. Everything I need is in the first half second of that cloud. She breathed out. Next long burst, I send it. Keep that man off me 8 more seconds. Copy. 8 seconds. She waited. The gun below went quiet. A lull, the gunner shifting a belt. And the weight stretched out with nothing in it. The longest empty seconds of the night. Toby's breathing loud beside her. Her own heart slamming. The cold, a fist around her hands. Come on, fire. Show me your breath. Somewhere below, one of the pinned men had 90 minutes that had become 20. Fire. The tower gun opened up again. A long raking burst down the snowfield, and the little cloud bloomed off the port lip, exactly where she'd known it would, pale and sudden in the muzzle flash. And Maren Cole read it, walked it back the length of a forearm, dropped it the height of a man's brow, held for the wind coming off her own left shoulder that she had spent 5 days learning, and broke the shot. The round left the barrel, and the world went silent and long. Nothing happened. The gas cloud hung. The gun kept firing. The round was still in the air, 800 meters of dark to cross. Most of a second of flight. And in that second, Marin did not breathe, and Toby did not fire, and the whole valley seemed to hold still around one small piece of moving metal. The gun fired. Still fired. Still. The tower gun stopped. It didn't sputter or trail off. It simply stopped. Mid-burst, the way a voice stops, and the snowfield below went dark and quiet, and the muzzle that had been licking fire into the night hung cold and silent off the stone lip. "Tower's cold," Marin said into the radio, and her voice did not shake, though everything in her was shaking. "Tower is cold. Saber, base, the gun is down. Cross the field. Cross it now." For one full second, the operations tent 6 kilometers away made no sound at all. Then Vane's voice, rough. "All elements, go!" And the snowfield below filled with running men, Bruner's Rangers pouring across the open ground that 30 seconds ago would have been a killing floor, and no gun rose to meet them. And Marin lay on the freezing shelf and watched the men she'd cleared the road for reach the compound wall and go over it. Behind her, Toby Reyes fired one more time, and then the flank went quiet, and the kid crawled back to her, and his voice was very small. "He's down, Overwatch. My guy's down. Did you get it? Did it work?" "It worked, Toby." She reached back without looking and gripped his arm hard. You held him off me the whole time. You hear me? Those men are alive because a comms kid held a rock in the dark." The relief force reached the 2 men pinned in the compound and reached the 2 in the outbuilding. And the medic's voice came up on the net at last, ragged with running, filling the channel that had been so empty. "Base, Saber. We got 'em. We got all 4. 2 urgent but breathing. We got 'em. 4. All 4. The number that had been counting down toward 0 stopped, and it held at 4. But there was still a man to carry, and Marin wasn't done, because the title of the harder job hadn't been claimed yet, not by anyone else, and she would not let it be. One of the pinned men couldn't be moved by the relief team. He was in the compound's main building, in a back room, pinned under fallen timber, when part of the roof had come down, and a fire had started in the front of the structure from a knocked-over lantern and was eating its way back. The Rangers who reached him couldn't free him and couldn't stay. The smoke and the flame were driving them out, and the walls were coming down. Bruner's voice came up on the net, and for the first time all night, the big master sergeant sounded like a man watching something he couldn't fix. "He's stuck under a beam in the back room, and we can't lift it and get him out through the fire both. We need more hands, and we're out of time. The building's going—" Marin was already up and moving, sliding down the ice she'd climbed, the empty rifle slung, because she was the closest body to the compound's back wall, and because she'd spent 5 days walking this ground, and knew there was a low mud-brick outbuilding butted against the main structure's rear. A goat shed, she'd clocked it on day 2, and its roof would put her at the back room's one small window, away from the fire eating the front. "Bruner, Overwatch, which room? Give me the room." "Cole, you can't. The front's fully involved." "I'm not coming in the front." "Which room?" "Back left. One window, but—" She hit the compound wall and went over it, and up the goat shed's sagging roof, and she was at the window, and she knocked the frame out with the rifle stock and went through into the smoke. The room was hot and black and full of it, and she went in low on her belly the way she did everything, where the air was, and she found him by his boot, a big man, bigger than Bruner, pinned to the floor, under a fallen roof beam, across both legs. His name, she'd learn later, was Sam Okafor, and he was conscious, and when her small hand closed on his arm, out of the smoke He grabbed it like a drowning man. "Who?" "Cole. I'm getting you out. Don't talk. Breathe low. Put your face by mine. The good air's down here." She could not lift the beam. 110 pounds of woman could not lift a roof beam off a 200-pound man, and the fire was in the doorway now, and she had about a minute. So she did the thing Dell had built into her without ever meaning to. She stopped fighting the weight she couldn't beat and looked at what the country gave her. The beam was pinning him to a dirt floor, not a slab. Dirt. "Sam, I can't lift it. I'm not going to try. We're going down, not up." She got the entrenching tool off his own kit, folded on his belt, and put it in his hand. "You dig your legs a hollow. I'll dig from the side. We drag you out under it, not out from over it. The floor's mud. The floor's the soft part. Dig, Sam. Dig like your life's in the dirt, because it is." And the two of them, coughing, half-blind, dug a shallow trough under his pinned legs in the mud floor, enough slack that she could haul his boots down into the hollow and drag him back and out from under the beam by the drag straps on his kit. Both hands, all her weight, boots braced on the mud brick, hauling a man twice her size an inch at a time toward a window while the fire came across the ceiling. She got him to the window. She got him half through it, and Bruner's Rangers were there on the goat shed roof to take his weight from the other side, and between them they pulled Sam Okafor out into the freezing clean air as the back room ceiling came down behind them in a rush of sparks. Maren came out last, coughing her lungs raw, and slid down the shed roof and sat down hard in the snow. And for a second the whole world was just breathing. Sam lay in the snow beside her, alive, his legs bad but his legs still his, staring at the small soot-black woman who had come through a burning window after him. He was shaking, and it wasn't only the cold. "You dug me out," he said. "You couldn't lift it, so you dug me out of the ground." "Floor was dirt," she rasped. "You don't fight the beam. You fight the floor." He grabbed her hand again, both of his around her one. He had something he needed to say, and could barely get to it. "I got a daughter. Grown. We haven't talked in 2 years. My fault, all my fault. I said something at her graduation I can't take back, and I've been too proud to—" His voice broke. "Am I going to make it? Tell me straight. Don't tell me what you tell everybody. Am I going to get to fix it?" Maren Cole looked at him, and she did not give him a hope. She gave him a fact. "You've got 2 broken legs, and smoke in your lungs, and a bird inbound in 6 minutes. Men walk away from all 3 every day of the week. You're going home, Sam. You're going to be sitting in a chair in a warm room in a month with those legs in casts, bored out of your skull." She held his eyes. "Long enough to make a phone call you've been putting off, you hear me? That's not a hope. That's your recovery timeline. You've got no excuse left." He laughed, and it turned into a cough, and the cough turned into something wet in his eyes, and he nodded and would not let go of her hand until the medics came. She sat in the snow with a man's dugout life beside her, and thought, unbidden, of a folded letter gone soft in her breast pocket, and of a phone number she'd been too proud to ask for, and she looked away up the mountain so Sam wouldn't see her face. The engagement itself resolved in a single line an hour later, when Brunner's element finished clearing the compound and reported it secure, the enemy dead or scattered, a fight that had cost the task force no one, because a small woman on an icy shelf had read a puff of frozen breath in the dark and taken the one gun that mattered off the board before the crossing ever began. That was all. 11 fighters resolved in a sentence. because it was never the part that mattered. What mattered started when the birds lifted the wounded off the mountain, and the sun came up gray over the ridge, and somebody had to make sense of what had happened. That job fell to a woman named Diane Prewitt, a review officer flown in from the higher command to reconcile the after-action record because the record made no sense to anyone reading it cold. She got Marin in a plywood room at the firebase with a laptop and a stack of statements and a deep skepticism she didn't bother to hide. Sergeant Cole, I'm going to be direct. I have a target grid, a shooting position, environmental data, and a claimed result, and I have run it past two of our own precision people, and both of them told me the shot as described is not possible. 840 meters, crosswind gusting past 20, full dark, a target you state you could not directly see. So help me understand what I'm actually writing down here. She folded her hands. Because right now, I'm looking at a very small person telling me a very large story. Marin didn't get angry. She'd been the very small person telling the large story her whole life. You've got the wind data from the fire base anemometer, she said. Pull the reading from the North Berm log, day 2 through 6. My log. Prewitt pulled it, frowned. This doesn't match the firebase readings. Because the firebase reads the yard. I read the gap. The wind in that valley switches 2/3 of the way to the target. It's not one wind, it's two. And the firebase instrument can't see the second one because it's on the wrong side of the rock. Your precision people ran it as one wind. That's why it comes out impossible. Run it as two. Run the near leg at the yard value and the far leg at the berm value. And the drift closes to something a person can hold. Prewitt ran it as two. Was quiet for a while. And the target you couldn't see. I didn't shoot a target I couldn't see. I shot the gas signature I could see and applied a fixed offset for a man's build behind the gun, a forearm back, a brow down. That's not a guess. That's geometry off a known thing. The gun told me where the gun was. The gun told me where the man had to be. Marin leaned forward. Ma'am, your people ran it as one impossible shot at an invisible man. It was two possible readings and a known offset. Nothing I did breaks physics. It just breaks the assumption that there's only one wind in that valley, and I spent 5 days on a berm learning there's two. Diane Prewitt looked at the reworked numbers on her screen, and at the small, sooty woman across the plywood table, and the skepticism came off her face in real time as the math closed. She closed the laptop slowly. I came up here to write down that the record was wrong, she said. I'm going to go write down that our modeling was. It was very late that night, in the dark of a half-empty tent, with the wounded evacuated and the firebase gone quiet, that the thing Marin carried finally cracked, and it cracked in front of the one person who'd earned it. Toby Reyes couldn't sleep. He sat on the cot across from her, in the dark, still keyed up, still turning it over, and it was Toby who finally said the thing out loud. I killed a man tonight. His voice was very flat, very young. First one. He was coming up the spur, and I put 2 rounds in him, and he went down, and I've just been lying here, trying to feel something about it, and I can't tell if I feel too much or nothing at all. Marin was quiet a long time. When she spoke, it wasn't the flat Overwatch voice. It was lower than that, and it had a crack running through it. You want to know what I've told nobody? She stared at the dark canvas. I've done this a long time. I'm good at it in a way that scares people. And every single time, before the shot, I hear an old man's voice telling me the country can't lie. And I hold on to that because it's true, and because he's dead, and because it's the only voice I trust. when it's my finger on it." Her breath hitched. "But there's a thing I can't make myself do, Toby, and it's got nothing to do with the mountain. I've got a sister I haven't spoken to in 9 years. I can read a puff of breath at 800 meters in the dark and put a round through a keyhole, and I cannot make my hand dial 10 numbers to a woman who shares my blood. I carry a letter to her on every deployment, and I've never once mailed it. I came out here and dug a stranger out of a fire and told him to go call his daughter, and I have never taken my own advice in my life." She stopped. Her hands, she noticed, were finally shaking, hours too late, the way it always came late. Toby Reyes, 23 years old, sat in the dark and found the truth she couldn't reach. "You keep other people's people alive," he said slowly. "You kept Sam alive for his daughter. You kept those 4 alive for whoever's waiting on them. You spend the whole thing making sure everybody else gets their phone call." He looked at her. "You just don't think you're on the list, like you're the overwatch for everybody's family, except your own." Marin didn't answer, but in the dark she pressed the heel of her hand flat against the folded letter in her breast pocket and held it there, and that was answer enough. The question of her sister, the 9-year silence, the number she was too proud to ask for, got answered 2 days later, and it got answered by a near stranger who had no business being able to answer it. Sam Okafor, it turned out, before the fire and the beam and the 2 broken legs, had been on the phone a lot from his hospital bed at the regional facility, and Sam Okafor had a daughter he was busy reconciling with, and reconciling had made him a man who could not stop talking about the woman who dug him out and told him to make the call. He'd told the whole ward about her, and a nurse at that facility, a reservist named Colleen Barrow, filling a rotation, a woman Marin had never met and never would meet in person, had listened to Sam describe the small sniper with the dead sister she wouldn't call, and had gone very still, because Colleen Barrow was from the same high country county Marin was. And Colleen Barrow knew exactly one other family of Coles from that hard sheep ground, and she knew that one of the Cole girls, a woman named Rennie, had spent the last 4 years telling anyone who'd listen that she'd give anything to find her sister, and had no idea how to reach her inside the army, and was too afraid the silence meant Marin wanted it that way. Colleen Barrow made 2 phone calls. That was all it took. A nurse who'd overheard a wounded man's story closed a 9-year gap in an afternoon, because she happened to be from the one county on Earth where both halves of it were known. The message reached Marin through channels, on a scrap of paper, in a handwriting she didn't know. "Your sister Rennie has been looking for you for 4 years. She thought you didn't want to be found. She's asking you to call. Here's the number." And under it, 10 digits. Marin had told herself for 9 years she was too proud to ask for, handed to her by a stranger who'd asked for nothing. Marin stood in the yard holding the scrap of paper and could not make the yard hold still. She thought didn't want to be found. The exact fear, word for word, that she'd carried, running the other direction the whole time. Both of them standing on opposite sides of the same gap for 9 years, each one certain the other had built the wall. She did not call right away. Some walls you have to walk up to slow. But she folded the scrap of paper around the soft old letter in her breast pocket, the 2 of them together now. And for the first time in 9 years, the letter had somewhere to go. Letter had he. Wade Bruner found her at the North Berm the next morning, and he'd earned the conversation the hard way, so she let him have it. He'd earned it because 2 nights before, when the birds were lifting the wounded, and there'd been one more man to move, and no clean way to do it. It had been Bruner who'd hauled Sam Okafor's dead weight down off that goat shed roof and carried him to the landing zone at a dead run under his own power. A big man doing the unglamorous heavy work in the dark with no one watching and no credit in it, because it needed doing. He hadn't mentioned it. Maren had seen it. Now he stood at the berm with his hands jammed in his pockets and looked out at the gap, and could not find the start of it. When it came broken, and it cost him. "I told you to stay out of the doorway." He stopped, started again. "3 days ago I looked at you and I saw a buck-10 kid and a rifle case bigger than she was, and I decided I knew the whole story. And I said it out loud, in the yard, in front of my men. And then you—" His jaw worked. "Then you went up an ice face I wouldn't put my best climber on, and you took a gun off my people that 2 of my best said couldn't be reached, and you went through a burning window after a man I'd already halfway written off. And I have been trying for 2 days to figure out how to say I was wrong, and every version of it sounds too small." Maren let the wind fill the space for a second. "Then don't make it big," she said. "Just don't say it to the next one." Bruner looked at her, and something in his face gave way, and he nodded, once, hard, the nod of a man taking on a debt he'd carry. "No," he said, "I won't." That was all. 2 people who'd started as a sergeant and an augment, standing at a berm, and neither of them needed it to be more than that. Sam Okafor's daughter came to see Maren a month later, back at the home station, and Maren did not know how to be in the room for it. Her name was Lena, and she was a school teacher, and she was not military at all, and she came in a civilian coat and sat across from Maren in the base coffee shop, and had clearly rehearsed something on the drive, and lost all of it the second she sat down. She didn't have any of the words. She just had a father, alive, in casts, in a chair in a warm room, exactly as Maren had promised him he'd be. A father who had called her, finally, and said the thing he should have said at her graduation, because a small woman had dug him out of the ground and told him he had no excuse left. "I don't know how to—" Lena started and stopped and tried again. "I had all these— I don't know the words you people use. I don't know how to say it in your language." "You don't need my language," Maren said. "You've got yours." Lena looked at her, eyes brimming. "He's home. He's in the living room, complaining about daytime television. And he drives my mother crazy. And he's there. He's just there, in the chair, being annoying, being alive. And I get to be annoyed at him? I get to have him be annoying at me for another 30 years? And it's because of you." Her voice cracked all the way through. "That's it. That's the whole thing. You gave me 30 more years of my dad being annoying, and I don't have a word big enough. So I'm just going to say thank you, and it's not big enough." Maren Cole, who was terse under pressure and had a fact for every fear, did not have anything for this. She opened her mouth and nothing came, and Lena saw it, and the 2 women just sat there in a base coffee shop with it too big for either of them, and that was right. Some things don't get a fact. Some things you just have to sit inside of. The recognition, when it came in a way Maren couldn't dodge, and it came from a room full of people who'd once looked straight through her. It was a task force formation, the whole element assembled in the big hangar before they stood down, and Colonel Ambrose Vane got up in front of 200 Rangers and support personnel to close out the deployment. And he did not do the thing commanders usually do. He didn't read a citation and move on. He stopped, and he looked out at the formation, and he told them what he'd told Marin in the tent, that he'd read a word on a personnel file, augment, and let it think for him, and that he'd stood in an operations tent at 4 a.m. and asked a woman he'd privately doubted to do the impossible because he'd run out of any other option, and that she'd said yes, sir, and gone and done it, and never once made him feel the cost of his own doubt. Sergeant Cole is going to hate every second of this, Vane said, so I'll be quick. 4 of our people are alive. The math that night said they shouldn't be. One person changed the math. And then Wade Bruner, Master Sergeant Wade Bruner, who 3 days into it had told her to stay out of the doorway in front of his men, stood up. He stood up first. In a formation, that costs something. You don't just stand in a formation. He stood up out of his seat in the front rank, and he turned to face 200 people, and then he turned back and faced Marin. And he came to attention, and he held it. And the hangar, which had started to understand what it was looking at, began to stand. Toby Reyes was on his feet before Brunner finished turning. Toby, who'd been there on the ice, who'd held the rock. Then Pruitt, the card game kid, scrambling up. Then a whole row of Rangers who'd run across that snowfield under a gun that never fired because she'd killed it first. It moved through the hangar like wind through grass. The exact thing Dell had taught her to read. A wave you could see coming across the whole room. Men standing, chairs scraping. 200 people getting to their feet for a woman 5'2" who barely came up to their shoulders. And the sound of it was enormous, and then the sound of it was nothing at all. Because once they were all up, nobody spoke. Diane Pruitt, the review officer who'd flown in to prove the record wrong, stood at the back with her arms crossed and did not uncross them, but her jaw was tight and she was blinking too much. Sam Okafor was there in a wheelchair, both legs still in casts, and he could not stand, so he did the only thing he could. He put 2 fingers to his brow and held them there and would not lower them. And Marin Cole stood at the front of it and barely moved. She'd faced down a tower gun without her hands shaking, and now her hands were shaking. She looked out at the standing room, and she did not know where to put her eyes. And she found Toby's face, and Toby just nodded at her the way he had on the mountain. Did it work? And she held on to that and stayed standing and let 200 people say the thing none of them had words for, the way Lena hadn't had words, the way you don't. Pruitt, the card kid, was the one who said it plainest. Later, out in the yard, when someone asked him what it had been like up there being saved by the augment. He thought about it a long time. He wasn't a sharp kid, and he knew it. I don't know how to explain her, he said finally. You look at her, and there's nothing there to see. She's little, and she's quiet, and she does everything real slow, like she's already seen how it ends. And then the worst night of your life happens, and it turns out she's the only one in the whole valley who was ready for it. He shook his head. It's like, you know how everybody's scared of the dark? She just isn't. She went up into the worst of it, like it was where she lived. I stood in a formation and stood up for her, and I still can't tell you what she is. I just know I'm alive, and it's her. 14 months later, Marin Cole stood on a hillside, a long way from any mountain, and the country was green, and there was no gun anywhere in it. 2 things had happened in those 14 months, and both of them had names. Toby Reyes had put in his packet and been accepted to train as a full-team member instead of a comms specialist, and he'd asked Marin to write his recommendation, and she had, and the line she wrote, "This man held a rock in the dark so I could work, which is the only kind of courage that actually counts, was the line the selection board quoted back to him when they told him he was in. And Sam Okafor had medically retired on 2 legs that worked well enough to walk his own ground, and he'd taken a job coaching a high school track team in his hometown, and he sent Maren a photo every season of a finish line, because a man who'd been dug out of the dirt liked to stand at the place where people crossed. Maren still couldn't hear right out of her left ear. The tower gun, the fire, 14 years of muzzle blast. The doctors had a word for it, and a hearing aid she wore and hated, and it whistled in the cold, and she would carry that whistle the rest of her life. She'd stopped being angry about it. It was just the receipt. Everything cost something. Hers was that she'd never again hear the wind clean in her left ear. The wind she'd spent her whole life learning to read. There was a joke in that she didn't make out loud. She was on the hillside because her sister lived at the bottom of it now. She'd made the call. It had taken her 3 weeks after the scrap of paper, and it had been the hardest 10 numbers she'd ever dialed, and Rennie had answered on the second ring, and neither of them had said anything for a long time, and then they'd both started at once. 9 years does not close in one call, but it had closed enough that Maren was standing on Rennie's hillside on a green afternoon, and down below, a girl of about 10, safe, and far from anything, and the only child anywhere in this whole story, was running across a yard toward a woman who looked like a softer version of Maren, and the girl was Maren's niece. And Maren had a folded letter in her pocket that she was finally, after 11 deployments, going to hand to the person it was written to, instead of mailing it, instead of carrying it, instead of telling herself next time. She stood at the top of the hill a moment before she went down. Old habit. Read the country first. The wind came up the slope and touched her face, and it was warm, and it lied to her. The way wind on your cheek always lies, telling her about right here and nothing about out there. But out there, at the bottom of the hill, was her sister, and a girl she'd never met, and 9 years she was about to start paying back. And for once in her life, Maren Cole didn't need to read what the country did to the wind to know what was waiting for her down there. She could just walk down and find out. She went down the hill, level-eyed, at peace, a small woman moving easy through the tall grass. And the grass leaned and straightened behind her, and somewhere an old man who'd taught her to read it was, she felt certain, reading her right back.